Ever wondered what life without Hellebuyck would look like with the Winnipeg Jets? Well, for the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to have to find out.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the number one sports podcasting network out there. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support in helping make Locked On the number one sports podcasting network out there. Tonight's episode, obviously, there is a lot to chat about. What I thought was just going to be a game recap about Nikolai Ehlers coming back with Carolina and playing his first home game in Winnipeg as a Cane has quite taken a turn. Connor Hellebuyck has been announced to have had arthroscopic surgery on his knee. It is going to sideline him 4 to 6 weeks, and holy cow, was that a little bit out of left field. I don't think any of us expected that, and I certainly wasn't thinking that this was on my Winnipeg Jets 2025-26 bingo card. Hellebuyck is probably the one player in Winnipeg franchise history for this current iteration of the Jets Winnipeg just really can't live without. The guy is truly one of a kind, and obviously his impact is going to be, well, it's going to be missed. But tonight's game against the Canes, I thought, at least gave a measure of confidence in the way the team played in front of Comrie that, you know what, perhaps this stretch might not be as unsurvivable as it appears. But of course, we'll talk about the impacts of that. And, you know, are the Jets maybe prepared to turn the 5v5 game around? Is this a sign of things to come? Who's going to step up and be the hero for the Jets? We'll chat about that all in a little bit. First, though, Winnipeg versus Carolina. This was probably one of the most talked about matchups for Winnipeg's schedule. It is the first game that we saw Ehlers coming back home after his exodus and free agency signing with Carolina. And we all knew that this was going to be a very hyped up game. The Canes, I'm sure, were probably circling this one a little bit on the schedule just because, you know, there's going to be a tribute video, a little bit of a break in the play, and it's a big opportunity for Carolina to continue to show why they're one of these Stanley Cup contenders out there. What we actually saw from this game I thought was very interesting. The Canes were surprisingly sloppy for a team that is first ranked in the Metro Division. I thought that their puck management wasn't great, and the way that Winnipeg pressured them, both at their own blue line, below the goal line, in space, actually put the Canes in a really tight position. The Canes are one of those teams that I think tends to lack, maybe elite skill on every line, but they're a very win-by-committee team. In fact, I often talk about them as kind of a similar model to how I would want the Jets to maybe look at some point in the future. Not exactly, though, because one of the things that Carolina has struggled with has been high-end finishing. Tonight's game was a little funky. The Jets gave up a goal in the first 5 or 10 seconds. Jordan Staal just sort of out-muscling and screaming down the ice for what was a weird shot, like obviously a great snipe, but just a weird goal to give up with all the energy and emotion, and it kind of quieted the crowd pretty quickly. Comrie really didn't have a chance, and so it was just kind of like, well, this is going to be an interesting outing. And, Winnipeg then answered not too long after that and actually took the lead. And you thought, the Jets are playing pretty good 5v5 hockey. They're going back and forth. The first period was very exciting. We had a power play goal from Gabriel Velarde, Josh Morrissey kind of doing his thing on a great trailing feed from Scheifele. And you thought, this is more like the Jets hockey of last year. You go up against a top team and you actually trade blows 1-for-1. The second period started to shift things for about 10 to 15 minutes. Winnipeg definitely struggled with the pace, and it felt like creating offense in this middle frame was a lot harder for the Jets, where the game was a lot more free-flowing in the opening 20. The second period, the Canes really put on a pretty tight hold on this game, and it wasn't until the latter stages of the period where the Jets started to claw back. But in the middle of that, Jordan Staal tied the game. And then I think probably one of the worst moments where there was a turnover on a Jets power play. It led to a Seth Jarvis shorthanded goal. And, the first shot from Aho was stopped. And then Jarvis was just completely alone. Nobody was back checking for Jarvis and couldn't stop him. And it was a tap in. So I don't like that lack of effort. For most of the game, I thought the Jets really gave a great performance. But in that moment, I didn't like that. I didn't see too many back checkers in the vicinity. Even if they couldn't make it, you still at least want to see the effort, especially when you know that you are shorthanded just a bit. And then Carolina ended up getting the game-winning goal on a power play opportunity. That was a great, great cross-slot pass from Ehlers. Svech had an empty net, basically. Not much Comrie could do about that. Winnipeg did really try and push to tie this one, though. Just a few seconds later, you had a Velarde goal. It was a great one, and you thought maybe the Jets would get an opportunity to score. They even had a late-game power play, goalie pulled. It felt like there was a game tire somewhere in this whole sequence, but unfortunately, it just didn't come quite through. Amidst all this, we did see a line change or two from Arniel. He did have Lowry with Perfetti and Nemesnikov, which is interesting. I'd like to see Perfetti and Lowry a little more consistently together. I think their tool sets and skills kind of align relatively nicely. We also saw Taves with Nyquist and Niederreiter. Thought those three had some rugged shifts. The thing that I've noticed with Taves, generally speaking, is it's kind of hard to keep putting him out there. He didn't have the worst game tonight, but I just feel like you're asking him to be a really big scorer and huge offense driver, and we're just not really seeing that. I think he's more of a bottom six guy, and if he takes some of those shifts and maybe swaps them with Lowry, you might get better results. Like Lowry really is our 2C for now, and until there's a better argument for somebody else, I just don't know what Winnipeg should do about this. So, overall, I think this game was what you might call an ethical loss. They played well. I thought that the 5v5 play was probably one of the more impressive games, especially given the quality of competition. The Jets pounced on a number of turnovers, but I think where Carolina had the edge was that in those one or two big mistakes from the Jets, the Canes took advantage and Winnipeg did not on the other end of things. It's just one of the situations, right, where you have a really close, tight game, and it's always those margin plays that kind of make the difference. Comrie, for his part, I thought played pretty well. He had a couple of really big saves, and overall, I just thought he looked, very sharp in net, and kind of in some ways maybe allayed the fears of what Jets fans were expecting when, we heard the Hellebuyck news earlier in the day. So, if he can handle this stretch for the next, I don't know, maybe 12 to 18 games, hopefully that's enough and that he can carry this team, into a playoff spot. But I think one of the toughest things, right, is, this loss already puts the Jets in the second wild card spot, and they're basically tied in points with Chicago, although right now they're, they've got a game in hand, and they do lead in goal differential over the Blackhawks. But the margin of error is just very narrow right now, and so Winnipeg really can't afford to drop too many results like this. But of the games that they've played this year, I thought that this was probably one of their strongest. And, arguably, if maybe a bounce or two had gone a different way, maybe we look at a different result here. The effort and will were there. I thought the Jets fought hard. They just came up a bit short. And because of that, you can maybe feel a little bit better about some of the upcoming games, one of which this weekend actually has some pretty early playoff implications. We'll talk about Winnipeg and sort of this stretch without Helly in just a little bit. Let's be honest, most of us can't name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch can help you track your spending, figure out how much you're putting into streaming services, help you manage your investments portfolio, and if you've got a partner or spouse, you can even have a shared account so you can set financial goals together and always stay on the same page. And the best part is, you don't even have to touch a spreadsheet. You've just got helpful data visualizations and tools to make it as easy as possible to manage your finances. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the number one sports podcasting network. Thanks for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about the post-game ramifications and really post-injury ramifications of Connor Hellebuyck being sidelined for about a month to a month and a half. This is, not the news that I think any of us were expecting. Came as a bit of a gut punch earlier today. The Lowry news yesterday was awesome, and then the Hellebuyck news kind of hit, and it was just kind of like a bit of a reality check. And so, I think a lot of us really do like Eric Comrie. He's proven to be a very good goalie, but this stretch for the Jets over the next few weeks is not going to be super easy. Comrie is going to have to really play some of his best hockey of his career for a sustained stretch, and that also goes for the Jets. Winnipeg, though, I thought put on against the Canes a pretty solid 5v5 game. One that I think is an effort they can generally be happy with, barring the mistakes, right? A couple of big mistakes, and those moments kind of decided the game. But the overall effort was there. So if you're in this situation, right, Hellebuyck has been your franchise cornerstone, your rock, and really the anchor that you lean on. How do you get through this? For one thing, the PK is going to have to be, better, right? Hellebuyck for the PK was really improved. In previous years, Helly's PK save percentage had really taken a nosedive. Recently, especially this particular season, he has been lights out on the man disadvantage. Now it's Comrie's turn, and I thought Comrie, for the most part, really acquitted himself. The Svechnikov goal I didn't love, not for him, though. I thought he did about as much as he possibly could. It's just that, it's a great cross-crease feed, and the Jets left a bit of a big gap for Ehlers to make that pass. So, it's just unfortunate, right? But otherwise, I thought Comrie did about as much as he could, and against a pretty potent Canes offense that scores through all sorts of, tips and deflections and just pouring stuff on net, even if it's low or medium danger, eventually stuff just gets through. Now, Helly has been one of the league's best I would say probably medium and high danger save percentage guys over the past couple of years. And now the Jets are going to have to figure out how to absorb the loss of their metronomic starter. Comrie, I think, is pretty solid. I would expect him to be, at a 905, 910, probably, maybe even 915 if we're really lucky over the next few weeks. I'd say, you expect more like a 905 to 910. This Jets defense is okay. It's still a little bit leaky on specific kinds of offense and attempts. But otherwise, I think this 5v5 effort has shown that they can kind of tighten things up. But it probably would be wise to maybe bench Luke Schenn right now. Schenn did not look particularly great against Carolina, and I think Colin Miller might be more helpful in a scenario where you frankly need the mobility and to keep the puck out of the defensive zone. Make those exits cleaner, get up the ice faster, and help Comrie, not have to face as many shots going forward. Tonight, he didn't really see a ton of pucks, but, some of those opportunities were of the more dangerous kind. And yes, the Jets didn't necessarily concede many high-danger chances on paper, but I also think some of the most dangerous opportunities were chances where Carolina had a pass that was there, and it just did not connect. So Winnipeg may have given up a few more things that just never materialized into shots on goal. Otherwise, I think you're going to have to see this team just tighten up the defensive structure, keep applying pressure at 5v5. I think the way that they played against the Canes should be, the blueprint. And we said as this team gets healthier, they're going to look more and more like the Jets of last year. And I think that's partially true. I thought against Carolina, Winnipeg pressured better. I thought that they looked more competent. The second period, though, is still a bit of a problem. The last change thing is catching Winnipeg when they're slow and trying to get guys off the ice and swap. And it's not easy to escape that offensive pressure when the opponents can keep rolling that zone possession advantage against you. So, didn't love that frame in particular, but, it is what it is, right? Something that the Jets are just going to have to figure out how to deal with. Second periods have kind of been their kryptonite at some point. If you're a serious playoff contender, you just got to work through it, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to show that you're good enough for this. But, Hellebuyck also at 5v5 kind of just gives this team confidence. And I think now that Comrie's in net, I wonder if Winnipeg tries to change the approach and be faster and more aggressive. They've tended to defer to Hellebuyck on a lot of opportunities and unscreened shots. Will Winnipeg want to keep the puck away from Comrie? Probably. Will they play a more up-tempo style? We'll see. Against the Canes, I thought they were surprisingly fast in a lot of areas. The Jets don't have a ton of team speed collectively, and yet they tried to play a faster game. That's good to see. I think that's an important thing, especially when your margins are narrow, right? I keep saying that, but I just think when you look at the standings compression, Winnipeg really doesn't have a lot of margin for error. And one of the biggest games of the season is now coming up this weekend against a team that they have frankly owned for the last several years. But now we have to see if the Jets can string together a massive result against the Minnesota Wild. Minnesota has played one more game than the Jets have, and they also own the third seed in the Central as of right now. Again, you don't have to read too much into the early standings results, but, this is, I think, probably about the time when you want to start firming up those playoff plans. And so the Jets need to come up with a huge home victory. I think based on the way that they played against Carolina, there's a better chance of that. If Winnipeg can take this Minnesota team apart, that gives you a nice springboard for what could be a tough road trip. You've got the Capitals, the Canes, and then the Preds over this next several days and Thanksgiving break for the U.S. So that's a tough schedule. Washington, probably not as dangerous as it once was in previous years, but they have scored like 7 or 8 goals in their last 2 games, so maybe I shouldn't downplay it too much. Canes on home ice, also very tough. Not an easy matchup. Going to be a challenge for Winnipeg to come away with a big result here, and Winnipeg just needs to be, cleaner, better, all that fun stuff. Nashville, on paper shouldn't be that bad, but every time the Jets and Preds play, it usually is a little bit of a closer run affair, and nothing is ever easy, right? Assuming that Helly is probably back closer to, I don't know what, we're probably thinking maybe December 29th, 31st, around the new year. That's a good, maybe, let's see, about 15 or 16 games where the Jets are going to have to go without him. And Thomas Milic, of course, is the other backup, so yeah, it's hard to get a real sense of just how long this procedure and rehab process is going to be. I know they said 4 to 6 weeks. When it comes to Helly, though, whatever time he needs, you just have to kind of go with it. Winnipeg has some major matchups against the Mammoth, the Avs, the Wild, even the Blues and Stars. So there's a lot of Central Division opponents here. A couple of the teams that the Jets are currently chasing, as well as some teams that are chasing the Jets for one of those last playoff spots. So this stretch, if ever there was a time to figure out what Winnipeg is made of, it is this moment. You are down your number one franchise superstar. You're down one of the hearts of this team and the guy who has been, quite frankly, your safety blanket for the better part of a decade now. How do you respond? What is your answer? This whole stretch of hockey is going to be arguably one of the biggest tests of this Jets franchise ever. How they respond, what they do, and really what the front office does over the next few weeks will be fascinating. I never thought we'd be in this spot, but, we've avoided any injuries to Helly for years now. We were probably overdue for him to at least miss a decent stretch of games somewhere in his career. He's been one of the healthiest Jets we've seen, and now Winnipeg has to survive without him for, a month to a month and a half. That's not easy. That's a tall order. But, if what the Jets did against the Canes is a sign of what they can do going forward, then, I think that there is some reason to look at this a little bit more optimistically. Assuming that things go in a very different direction and the Jets really start to fall into the bottom third of the NHL, which I don't want to say is likely, but it is a possibility. It's not a non-zero chance. The Jets, could potentially walk out of here thinking maybe they need to sell some contracts, maybe they need to make some trades, and perhaps at the end of this, if the stretch really does set Winnipeg back enough, we might be looking at a higher draft pick, which, I don't think people should be too upset about. Will it be rough for the season? Yes. But at the end of the day, the Jets need some really big talent pieces. And if you aren't trading for them, well, one of the other ways to get them is from a major draft pick. So, I think either way that the Jets come out of this, they do potentially stand to gain something from it. Either situation is not necessarily a bad thing. So, keep an open mind. We'll see how this goes. But it is going to be a very interesting second half of November and, early December. It's going to be one of the craziest stretches of Jets hockey I can imagine. If this team has the fiber to really pull this off and stay afloat, then we might be in for a very special second half of the season. All I hope is that the guys put out their best effort and give the Jets fans something to cheer for. We'll just have to see what they come up with in a few weeks. But of course, amidst all this, I want to talk about who's going to have to really stand up for this team and support guys like Comrie and Milic as the Jets navigate this very uncertain territory. We'll talk about that coming right up. Let's be real, making excuses doesn't solve everything. We've all heard them before. It's just stress, I'm tired, or it happens to everyone sometimes. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support. And that's where Rugiet comes in. Rugiet.com offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED, designed to help you stop making excuses and start making moves. Rugiet makes it super easy to get started. You just connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online. No awkward waiting rooms, no in-person appointments, and if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly straight to your door. The process is fast, simple, and private, and it's all handled by real doctors. It's about confidence, connection, and getting back to the moments that matter most. Visit rugiet.com/lockedonnhl to get 15% off your first order. That's rugiet.com/lockedonnhl. And don't forget to use our code LOCKEDONNHL so they know we sent you. Rugiet, stop making excuses and start making moves. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. And you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. And if you're somebody who really believes yourself to be a big basketball or sports nerd and you track every player stat, this is your chance to turn that knowledge into true winning. If you think you know who's going to be the league's MVP, or maybe even who's going to hit the most threes this season or in a given game, this is your chance to make a killing off that win, right? That knowledge is your power. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcasting network. Thanks for rejoining us as we're just chatting a little bit about the Jets post-Hellebuyck over the next few weeks. Gonna be a frankly interesting period in Winnipeg's history. We've not really seen life without Helly in many years, especially for an extended period. This is going to be one of the more chaotic moments, I'm sure. But if the Jets versus Canes game was anything to go by, hopefully a recovered 5v5 game will try and make this a little more salvageable, right? The Jets need to hold a playoff spot however they can for the next few weeks. What that's going to entail, well, we're going to need some standout performances from a lot of players. The first guy that's going to really have to carry a lot of the load is Josh Morrissey. He has already been a stud top 5, even top 3 defenseman this year, right? He's going to have to be at his absolute best. The Jets really live and die off of him and Sandberg on that left side. And Morrissey is just such a dynamic presence in all situations. He does everything pretty dang well. And he's also a great defender, right? So he is one of the guys that just has to stand up and be a leader for this team. And he already has been, right? I don't really worry about him. Scheifele and Connor also need to just clean up some of their game too. Offensively, they've been very bright. No question about that. But the turnovers and mistakes in the D zone have to, be worked on. And I don't expect it to change. I'm sure this is just a thing that at this stage of their careers, it is what it is, right? But when you've got Comrie, you want to make sure that you give him as much support as possible. Don't let some of those easy trailing skaters get into prime shooting spots and try and take away from those easy shooting lanes. Sell out for a block shot or something. Lay your body on the line if you have to. It's easier said than done. But I think when you're not with your franchise heart-winning, Vezina-winning goalie, you need to give your backup some real love. I think the Canes game is a good example. I think they actually did quite a bit of that, but then there were the D zone mistakes and things that you don't want to see. So, you know, try and minimize those as much as you can. We're also going to have to see Taves be better. You know, he's not really been that noticeable on the ice, and you know, partly it's not necessarily something he can control, right? He's had 2 years off. He's coming back. This is what his 20th or 21st game since then. His body is just not in a state that I think it's going to allow him to be, you know, a high end 2C. But if he can at least try and be a little more impactful in the offensive zone and maybe help a little bit more in the DZ, that'd be great, you know, and it might just be about finding the right line mates for him so that you can sort of mitigate the defensive zone impacts and maximize what he's best at on the forecheck. Another guy that I think we really want to see step up and who I think has already looked pretty bright in his return is Morgan Barron. Barron is, you know, a guy that I think might be worth giving more ice time to. You see a lot of interesting plays and skill from him. Maybe this is a chance for him to start getting a few extra shifts. See if he might be able to be a guy who floats a little higher in the top 9. You know, he's traditionally been a fourth liner. Maybe he deserves a bigger role with this team. We already saw Lowry kind of get the bump with Perfetti tonight. Maybe Barron is another guy that you think about giving a bigger role to. You know, the rest of the team, I think, is probably punching about the weight that you'd expect. And, you know, I've highlighted a lot of the team stars, but also some of the guys that I think are valuable and maybe just need to add a little bit more on top of their current game. But, you know, this team kind of lives and dies by their best players being their best players. And now they're without their absolute best players. So here we go, right? If ever, like I said, there was ever a time to figure out what the 2025-26 Winnipeg Jets are made of, it is this moment. This whole stretch of hockey could really define this franchise, not just for the season, but going forward. I think one of the things that we saw from, you know, the Bones era of hockey was a team that really fought to the last whistle. There were stretches where you didn't see that in the second half of the season, but I really feel like under Bones and Arneal that, you know, sell out, be that ruthless leader on the ice, you know, try and fight for every shift sort of mentality did start to bleed into this team. I really felt like the effort has always been there and, you know, the will is there. So now it's just time to see if you can make it as long as you can without your franchise netminder. Comrie has given me some confidence that he can handle these next few weeks, but we are going to be facing some really tough competition and some hard teams that, quite frankly, will have the Jets' number at times. If you can make it through the stretch above 500 and with a decent enough record, you know, the rest of the season should come a lot more naturally once Hellebuyck is back. But curious to know your thoughts on this. Do you think the Jets are going to end the calendar year in a playoff spot, or do you feel like Winnipeg might be on the outside looking in? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. We'll see you here next week, so have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.